There's a first time for everything, even if you're not quite prepared for it. So, here's where it all begins. My name's Ethan, just an ordinary American guy, working hard as an electrician, always up for a challenge and proud of a job done right. I live in a comfortable little house in a quiet town with my wife, Sophie. We've been married for 8 years. Sophie's a sharp, ambitious woman, a sociology professor at the local university. Our life seemed pretty good, or at least that's what I thought. We shared dreams, made plans, and had our fair share of laughs and disagreements, like most couples do. But recently, something in our relationship felt off. It was a Wednesday evening around 6 p.m. when I finally made it home after staying late to finish a wiring job my supervisor, Brandon Hayes, had thrown at me earlier in the day. I pushed through the extra hours to get it done almost half a day ahead of schedule, even if it left me with sore muscles. Sophie had left that morning for a 3-day seminar in Columbus, leaving me the house to myself, which I figured would give me some quiet time to focus on work. I'd actually wanted to go with her, but she'd insisted we wait until our spring break cruise. Those tickets were on proud display in the china cabinet, a little beacon of hope for better days. When I got in and noticed there wasn't a single message from Sophie saying she'd arrived safely, I felt a twinge of worry and decided to call her. Using the landline, I dialed her cell, and after just 2 rings, she picked up, sounding unusually pleased to hear from me. She even said she was just about to call me, which wasn't too surprising since the home phone displayed my number. Got that mind-reading skill perfected, huh? I joked. So, did you get there in one piece? Traffic treat you okay? I added with a chuckle, picturing her rolling her eyes at my teasing. If she were there in person, she'd probably stick her tongue out at me. It was January, and I'd been a little uneasy about her driving in snowy conditions. She laughed, telling me everything was fine, the traffic was light, and she'd found the hotel easily thanks to the map I'd printed for her. You know I'd do anything for you, Sophie. Nothing's too much trouble for my girl, I said, though I still felt a sting from how firmly she'd refused to let me tag along on the trip. No, you're not coming, she'd said, making it clear she wanted to wait until spring break for a trip together. Yeah, I know, just giving you a hard time, I'd replied, covering up my disappointment with a laugh. I'll be a good boy and stay home. When she replied, Glad to hear it, Ethan. It'll be all seminars and networking. No time for us to spend together anyway. There was a touch of relief in her voice that didn't sit right with me. Reading my mind again, Sophie? I asked more pointedly this time. Need to tell me something? Oh, you reminded me. I can't find my travel bag, the one with the sewing kit. Maybe it's in the bedroom or the car trunk, she said, her tone shifting to one of casual distraction. Hold on, babe. Let me grab the cordless, I said, and I headed upstairs, finding the bag on the dresser. Found it, I told her. Make sure you keep those buttons and lint under control, I joked. She sighed with relief, saying she might stop by a store to pick up a few other things. Registration's about to open, she added. It'll be a packed few days, but we'll have Saturday evening to ourselves. Got it. I worked late today, so I should be in the clear through Friday. Call me if you get a chance, and I'll do the same, I said, trying to sound upbeat. After we hung up, I wandered downstairs, a strange uneasiness gnawing at me as I thought over Sophie's behavior lately. She'd been acting different for months now, and her resistance to my joke about joining her on the trip only added to that feeling. Hungry and a little preoccupied, I ordered a pizza and changed out of my work uniform while waiting the 40 minutes it would take to arrive. I grabbed a cold beer and sat at the kitchen table, hoping the news on TV might distract me from my thoughts. Being an electrician kept me in shape, so I wasn't too concerned about indulging in pizza, especially since Sophie wasn't there to give me a hard time about it. I figured I'd just save any leftovers for lunch the next day. But the news didn't hold my attention. I kept circling back to thoughts of Sophie and her strangely distant behavior. The way she shut down my suggestion of joining her on this trip just felt off. Sophie's a striking woman, 35, tall and slender, with long dark hair and eyes that seem to see right through you. She's proud of her work as a sociology professor and often talks about her heavy workload. Luckily, she's got a teaching assistant, Diego, a senior who handles grading and advising. I used to hear a lot about Diego, but lately, she hasn't mentioned him much. I remembered her mentioning these seminars back in November, when she seemed open to the idea of me tagging along. But just a couple of weeks later, she did a complete 180, saying she'd rather save a trip for spring break. I wasn't thrilled but reluctantly went along with her decision. Over Christmas, the topic of seminars didn't come up. We were too busy with family and friends. Sophie got some envelopes with training materials, signed up quickly, and started packing early, as usual. Later that evening, I went back to the bedroom to grab a book from the nightstand. I noticed Sophie's travel bag on the dresser and decided to move it to its spot in the closet. That's when I saw her journal beneath it. After 8 years together, I hardly ever saw it, always stashed away somewhere out of sight. One time, I joked about reading it, but she'd shut that down fast, calling it private. Since then, we hadn't brought it up, and I'd only caught brief glimpses of it on the rare occasions it wasn't tucked away. I figured she must write in it when she was home alone or in her office. Curiosity got the better of me as I picked up the journal, a small, red leather book with a brass lock. Only about a third of the pages had writing, so it clearly wasn't the whole story. There had to be older journals, hidden somewhere else. I couldn't shake the feeling that Sophie had more diaries stashed somewhere, so I figured her closet was the best place to start looking. We each had our own space, and I'd never bothered to go through hers before. Upstairs, I rummaged around for about 5 minutes before finding a shoebox on the top shelf with a neat stack of red leather diaries. Feeling a strange mixture of guilt and determination, I brought them back down to the kitchen. Each diary had a small white sticker on its spine, numbered 1 through 6, while the current one I'd found in our bedroom was unmarked. On the back of each was the word, "Comes," stamped into the leather, the name of a local specialty store. All the locks on these diaries looked identical, with no special markings or differences. I knew it wasn't right, but my curiosity won out. I needed to understand what was going on with Sophie. Maybe these diaries held the answers. Sitting at the kitchen table, I took a deep breath and looked at the stack of diaries. A thought crossed my mind: if they were all from the same store, maybe they used the same key. Unable to resist, I grabbed the phone book and found Come Specialties listed, hoping they'd still be open. It was around 8:35 p.m., and some downtown stores stayed open late on Wednesdays. After 2 rings, a young woman answered, "Come Specialties. How can I help you?" She sounded friendly, which eased my nerves a bit. I told her I was interested in their red leather diaries, about 6 by 8 inches, saying it was a gift. She paused, saying she'd check, and after a few minutes, she came back to confirm they had 2 in stock. "We're open until 10, she added, and I didn't waste a second heading down there, hoping to buy a diary and maybe, just maybe, a key that would fit Sophie's. It was a long shot, but I knew trying to force the lock could damage it, and bring down Sophie's wrath if she found out. Less than half an hour later, I was on my way home with a red leather diary and a key tucked inside the bag. $60 was a hefty price tag, but I thought of it as a small fee to uncover the truth about what had been troubling my wife. I thought about giving her the new diary as a birthday present, imagining her surprised reaction. Sophie had a habit of keeping things from me, like the time she didn't tell me about an abnormal pap test result until long after. I wondered if she was hiding some other health issue, or something even darker. A gnawing thought crept in, the possibility that Sophie might be seeing someone else. I pushed it aside, not wanting to believe it, but it lingered. Despite our differences, she's tall and slender with long dark hair, and I'm shorter, blonde, blue-eyed. We'd known each other since high school. We'd dated briefly back then, went our separate ways when I started my electrician's apprenticeship, and she went off to college. But we reconnected there, got married right after she graduated, and built a life together. Now that I'm a master electrician with a home of my own, we've even talked about upgrading to a bigger place and starting a family. Sophie had planned to stop taking birth control by the end of the school year. Back home, I carefully examined the new diary's key, which came in a small envelope inside the box. It looked small, almost too small, for the locks on Sophie's journals. I realized I should have asked the clerk more about the key. If it didn't fit, I'd have to abandon the idea of unlocking her diary rather than go hunting for her keys around the house. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the edge of discovering something important. Minutes later, I was back at the kitchen table, the stack of diaries in front of me, wrestling with whether I should try the key on her current journal. My concern for her and my curiosity won out, though a voice in my head warned me about crossing a line. I took a deep breath and slipped the key into the lock. To my surprise, it fit perfectly. As I opened the diary, I quickly found her latest entries, the most recent written just the day before. Her neat handwriting filled the pages, and as I read, a chill ran through me. My face went pale and tears filled my eyes. In shock, I stumbled to the kitchen sink, crushing a soda can in my grip until it spilled over, splattering onto my arm. After cleaning up the mess, I carried the diaries into the living room, setting them on the end table. I turned on the lamp and settled into my chair, bracing myself for the truth about my wife and our life together. Instead of jumping straight to the end, I decided to start from the beginning. Maybe there was an explanation buried in the earlier entries that would help me understand. Thoughts of confronting Sophie at her hotel flashed through my mind, but I dismissed them, fearing I'd lose my composure if I saw her in person. On the first page, dated in early June, Sophie's words seemed calm and satisfied. She expressed contentment with her career, life, and even our marriage, but nothing from the summer hinted at the revelation I'd seen in the most recent entry. By early September, however, I found an entry that started to give me the answers I was looking for. On September 8th, she wrote about meeting her new teaching assistant, Diego Vargas. She described him in detail. Taller than her, dark hair, dark eyes, and a short beard, noting his strong qualifications. Intrigued, I searched for more entries mentioning Diego but found nothing until about a week later. On September 15th, she described how Diego had been helpful in managing her large class of over 100 students, often assisting students while she organized lecture materials. She added that several of her female students seemed to have taken a liking to him, comparing him to a young Leonardo DiCaprio. As I read on, Diego's name began popping up more frequently, and I examined each mention closely. On September 20th, she wrote that classes were moving along as usual, with a few students dropping out because of the challenging coursework. She observed that Diego often sat in the front row, watching her during lectures, and she planned to give him more responsibilities. A few days later, on September 24th, Sophie wrote about a day when Diego came to her office to help with a reading assignment. In the same entry, she also mentioned wanting to talk to me about starting a family, marking the first time the topic had come up in her diary. But by September 30th, she noted how Diego seemed to be paying more attention to her during lectures, though she would occasionally shoot him a disapproving look. She described how female students would gather around him with questions, showing more interest in him than her. Yet, despite all this, she sounded pleased with her students' progress and seemed to be managing the pressures of being a full professor. Each page painted a clearer picture, one that left me feeling cold and uneasy. The admiration she described in Diego's eyes, her hesitation to address it, and her lingering glances in his direction. Every entry seemed to add weight to the knot growing in my stomach, and as I read on, it became painfully clear that this was only the beginning. The entries following the last one left out any mention of Diego, which only deepened my confusion. Sophie wrote optimistically about her classes and had even shared with me her goal of starting a family after finishing her first year as a full professor. She wanted us to try for a baby once the school year wrapped up. Then, on October 8th, I read that she had shared this decision with Diego, who responded with an encouraging smile and an unexpected hug. She noted she quickly reminded him of the professional boundary between them. But on October 10th, her words had an uneasy tone. Diego had locked her office door during a visit, only to unlock it after she asked him to. He left soon after, but she found herself questioning his intentions. The next day, Diego returned to help with some work, mentioning how he preferred mature women and apologizing for his behavior the day before. Though she was committed to me, Sophie admitted feeling flattered by his attention, intrigued that he seemed more interested in her than the younger women around campus. By October 13th, She was actually looking forward to his visits and even felt disappointed when he didn't stop by. She wanted to probe further into his comments about older women, finding herself oddly drawn to his attention. 2 days later, she noted hoping that he'd linger after the students left her office, but he'd left before she had a chance to talk to him. On October 16th, Sophie finally had a private conversation with Diego, where he opened up about his past experiences with older women, which had shaped his preference. She wrote that she regretted not setting clearer boundaries and felt troubled by how things had developed. My stomach churned as I read these entries. Sophie's reaction was not what I'd expected. I left the diary open, grabbed another can of soda, and returned to the kitchen table, determined to keep reading. Then came the entry on October 20th. That day, just as Sophie was about to leave work, Diego barged into her office, ignoring her request to leave the door open. He confessed that he couldn't stop thinking about her and even asked her for a longer kiss, saying it was his birthday. Although she felt uneasy, she agreed just to get him out of her office. Later, she realized his birthday wasn't even in October. It was in July, and felt tricked, though she laughed it off. She wrote about her growing concern over his intentions and resolved to be more careful around him. In the next entry, she noted that Diego hadn't been around as she focused on grading, which I found odd, given how often he seemed to show up. But the entry gave no clue as to why he was absent. Then came October 30th, and I felt my chest tighten as I read. Today, something happened that's hard to put into words. Diego came into my office, locked the door behind him, and pulled me close before I could react. I felt ashamed for not stopping him sooner, and when I finally pushed him away, he said I'd enjoyed it. I told him to leave, but he just smirked and promised he'd see me tomorrow. I feel trapped, confused, and unsure if I should tell Ethan. Worse, I can't stop thinking about Diego. I must have read that entry a dozen times, each time growing angrier than I'd ever felt. Then I came to November 2nd. She wrote, I finally stopped worrying that Ethan might notice something's wrong. The first night was nerve-wracking, but he didn't suspect a thing, even with how tense I felt. It's shocking how easy it is to keep things from him. On November 6th, she wrote, I haven't been alone with Diego in days. Even in class, his staring makes me uncomfortable. I'm dreading the thought of him stopping by my office again. 2 days later, she described another brief visit from Diego. He dropped by when others were around but still managed to kiss her quickly before leaving, which left her feeling both uncomfortable and intrigued. She was already considering attending a seminar series in Columbus after New Year's, though she didn't explain why that decision was weighing on her mind. November 9th's entry hit me hard. Yesterday was another difficult day. Diego's behavior is becoming harder to handle, and I'm beginning to worry about where this could lead if I don't act soon. I tried to stay focused on my work, but Diego slipped into my office when no one was looking. He tried to kiss me, and for a moment, I hesitated before briefly giving in. I managed to push him away and fled to the bathroom, sick with guilt and terrified Ethan might find out. Unfazed, Diego left, saying he wanted more. I barely had time to pull myself together before Ethan got home, hiding my distress as we talked through the evening. Seething with rage, I went over that entry several times, obsessing over the details of her encounter with Diego. Oddly, there was no mention of him in the following week's entries, and the silence gave me a slight sense of relief. But then, on November 17th, Sophie confessed, I'm in a complicated place. Diego's hold over me is stronger than I expected. I can't tell if it's his confidence or my own weaknesses, but I feel powerless around him. This afternoon, I confronted him about our encounters, stressing how inappropriate it was considering my marriage and our professional relationship. He responded by suggesting we lock the office door and sit on the couch. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We crossed a line today, and now I feel caught between wanting to fire him and rationalizing what we've done. I could never confess this to Ethan, and I feel grateful our mistakes are hidden behind office doors. I need to compose myself before going home tonight. The deeper I delved into Sophie's diaries, the harder it became to accept just how far things had spiraled. Driven to understand her motives, I continued reading, unable to tear myself away. It was well past 2 a.m., but sleep was out of the question. I left a message at work, saying I'd be out for personal reasons, my mind too wrecked to think about anything else. My whole world felt shattered, and a dull emptiness replaced the love and hope I once had for our marriage. After finishing my soda, I rinsed the can in the bathroom and returned to the living room, my mind spinning from everything I'd uncovered. Just 8 hours earlier, I'd been chatting with Sophie, completely clueless about the nightmare unfolding around me. On November 22nd, her entry read, "Diego dropped by today, but I kept my distance, staying safely behind my desk. He acted professionally and didn't lock the door, sensing my decision to keep things businesslike. I'm hoping this resolve will hold." It struck me how her tone had shifted to a more upbeat one as the semester wound down. But to me, her upbeat mood felt almost mocking. By November 23rd, Sophie finally told me about the upcoming seminars, and I, wanting to be supportive, even offered to go along with her. But things seemed to take a drastic turn over the next few weeks. On November 25th, Diego visited her office once more, pushing boundaries as he suggested coming over to our house. Sophie firmly rejected the idea, making it clear that it was out of the question. Not one to give up easily, he pressed on, asking about me directly and even hinting he'd like to visit my place. She shot down his idea immediately, even as he kept pushing, expressing interest in the seminars, which were strictly for faculty. On November 30th, she wrote, "Yesterday was unbearable. I'm feeling so lost. I couldn't sleep, and Ethan picked up on it, asking if I was okay. I wish I could tell him the truth, but I can't find the words. Diego has invaded my thoughts, even my dreams. I don't feel anything romantic toward him, but I'm haunted by everything that's happened. When he locked the door, I froze, unable to move, even as my mind screamed to get away. After he left, I broke down and cried, overwhelmed with regret. I stayed locked in my office for hours, struggling to process it all. Maybe I need help, therapy, something." Her words left me wondering who this person was because it didn't seem like the Sophie I thought I knew. Reading each entry pulled me further into a dark place. Then on December 3rd, her diary noted, "Today, Diego cornered me in the hallway, asking me to reconsider coming to his place. He wanted us to be together in a real bed, but I refused, reminding him of the risks to my career and marriage. He wouldn't quit, though, even suggesting he'd pay his own way to attend the seminars if I just stay with him overnight. I turned him down, but his words linger in my mind. I keep doubting my own strength. Fuming, I forced myself to take a break, fighting the urge to drink, knowing I needed my head clear. I realized I needed a solid plan for how to confront this, how to piece together the next steps in my life. Once I'd calmed down, I went back to the living room and kept reading. On December 7th, she'd written, "Diego stopped by to say goodbye before his Christmas break. He mentioned his final exam tomorrow and even joked about coming back early for the seminar, saying it would help me unwind. I told him to call me in a few days." Then, on December 8th, she confessed, "Today, I lied to Ethan, convincing him to stay home while I go to the seminar. I even suggested a cruise as a distraction. He was hesitant but eventually agreed. I feel terrible for deceiving him. I haven't decided if I'll bring Diego with me, but I keep thinking about it. Our last encounter in my office keeps replaying in my mind. I love Ethan, but I can't seem to stop thinking about Diego. I'm waiting for his call, wondering if he'll push further or finally let it go." By December 12th, her next entry revealed, "Diego called again, pressing to join me in Columbus. He suggested we book adjoining rooms and pretend he's my brother. He'll cover the costs if I agree. Now I'm faced with a decision, whether to betray Ethan." 2 days later, on December 14th, she admitted, "Diego called, sounding excited about our stay at the Sharon. I made the reservation, guilt churning in my stomach. He'll be gone after this semester, so I won't have him as a TA much longer. I hope I can resist temptation, but something about him draws me in, something I've never felt before. I'm terrified of Ethan finding out. It would destroy him, The December 28th entry hit harder than any before it. Diego called it home yesterday, using a fake name in case Ethan picked up. He confirmed our plans for New Year's Eve, and, despite my doubts, I agreed. I felt a thrill I couldn't deny, telling myself this would be the last time, hoping it might help me move on from him for good. Ethan's busy with work, so I've had time to make all the arrangements. It's strange. I haven't spent even a single night away from him for another man since our marriage. Yet here I am. I've decided to follow through with Diego's plan, hoping it disrupts these feelings. I checked the clock. It was nearly 6 a.m. now. I felt like a man hollowed out, watching the life I'd known crumble around me in the course of one terrible night. The love and trust I'd once felt for Sophie were replaced with a toxic mix of rage and betrayal. Though I was nearing the end of her diaries, I felt I had to read each word, to be sure of everything. Even though they hadn't physically crossed a line yet, I needed to be absolutely certain. Leaving the final pages for later, I got up to make some coffee, hoping the caffeine might help me power through. On January 3rd, Sophie wrote, "Tomorrow is the big day. I'll be away for 3 days of seminars and nights with Diego. I'll pick him up before we leave town and drop him off afterward." Thankfully, Ethan didn't insist on joining me. I've got a map to help navigate, and I found a Victoria's Secret nearby. Maybe I'll grab something special to wear for Diego. It unsettles me, but I'll wash everything thoroughly before seeing Ethan. I forgot to remind Diego to bring contraceptives, but we can stop at a pharmacy. The anticipation is thrilling, though I worry about what Diego might expect. I plan to save any new experiences for our cruise, spinning it as an adventure for Ethan. I've started packing, hoping he doesn't suspect anything. I question whether I'll go through with it. What happened in my office was spontaneous. This trip is carefully planned. I could back out and cover Diego's costs, but the thought of it all arouses me in a way I can't explain. Finishing that 7th journal, I sat there, stunned, processing everything I just read in the past 9 hours. The magnitude of Sophie's betrayal hit me harder than I thought possible, and a plan began forming in my mind for the next 3 days. Whether she followed through with her plans with Diego or not, it was clear to me that our marriage was over. The trust was shattered beyond repair, and forgiveness wasn't an option I could imagine anymore. My love for her was quickly turning into anger and disgust, mostly directed at Diego. Before noon, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I'd found online the night before. "Ellis Investigations, how can I help you?" came the polite voice of a woman on the other end. The professionalism in her tone gave me a small sense of control. "Do you handle divorce cases?" I asked, a bit unsure if that was the right way to phrase it, but hoping she'd understand. "If you mean investigating a potentially cheating spouse, yes. Would you like to speak with an investigator?" "Yes, please. I'm interested in your services," I replied, feeling steadier. After a brief hold, a man with a firm voice introduced himself. "This is Oliver Ellis. How can I assist you?" Without hesitation, I told him everything. "I suspect my wife is involved with another man, and they're meeting at the Sharon Hotel near the airport. I need photographic proof and a quote on the costs." "The Sharon, huh? We can handle that. Is this ongoing, and what kind of timeline are we looking at?" Ellis asked. "My wife is booked there until Saturday morning, in room 412. The man she's with is in the adjoining room, 414. They stayed last night, but I only decided to take action this morning. She's attending seminars and he's tagging along." I explained, hoping he understood the urgency. "Understood. I'll need a bit more information on what you're looking for with surveillance. Do you have their names and descriptions?" I described Sophie in detail and offered to send a recent photo if needed. I also provided Diego's full name and the rough description I had pieced together from Sophie's diary. "It's a straightforward setup, Mr. Brooks. We can install cameras in both rooms this afternoon and leave them in place until after checkout on Saturday. Installation is quick, and we have a fixed rate per entry to access the rooms. If you only need photographic evidence and not live monitoring, the cost is a flat $800. Would a single camera be cheaper? I only need proof that they were together. If possible, I'd prefer to see the photos tonight and get confirmation by tomorrow. To cover both rooms, since we don't know which one they'll use, we'll need to place cameras in both. The rate includes the equipment and entry fees. We'll need to hire a maintenance worker to enter for installation and retrieval, which adds $100. Sorry if I sound new to this. I'll pay up front with a credit card on your website. Perfect. Just fill out the form and reference case number 1372A. Once we've received payment, I'll set up the cameras, and you'll receive a DVD copy of the footage. Please provide your name and address for the delivery. The process sounded simple enough, though I was hesitant about waiting for a DVD by mail. Could you hold on to the DVD for now? What I need is photographic proof. Nothing explicit, just evidence that confirms the affair. Understood, Mr. Brooks. I'll pull still frames from the footage, he replied. I provided my phone number and completed the payment as we spoke. The investigator confirmed the payment and immediately started arranging for the cameras. With everything in place, I finally let myself give in to the exhaustion weighing me down. After a nap and a quick bite to eat, I picked up Sophie's diaries again, now reading with a bit more distance, powering through without lingering on each page. Just before 10 p.m., Sophie called. Our conversation felt unnervingly smooth, each of us hiding our secrets. I couldn't help but wonder if it was as easy for her to conceal her actions as it was for me to conceal mine. With everything arranged, I felt a strange sense of calm, though I knew my life would never feel normal again. Afterward, I double-checked the plans I'd set in motion. Friday would come with more errands, including a stop at the bank to manage our finances. I'd already left my position at Thompson Electric, just waiting on my final paycheck. It was past 1 a.m. when I finished the second volume of Sophie's diaries. I hadn't expected it to take so long, but thoughts of her and Diego consumed me. Finally, I collapsed on the couch and, to my surprise, drifted off, waking around 7 a.m. feeling slightly refreshed. I grabbed a quick breakfast and decided to dig back into the diaries, quickly finishing the third and fourth volumes by noon. Setting them aside, I knew it was time to tackle my growing list of tasks. I went to Thompson Electric to collect my last paycheck and empty out my locker. Gus Thompson, the owner, seemed reluctant to let me go, but seeing my resolve, he simply shook my hand and wished me well. The bank paperwork took longer than I'd hoped, but I finally walked out with a bag containing just over $20,000 from our joint and personal accounts. It wasn't as much as I'd have liked, but it was what I could withdraw without Sophie's authorization. When I got home around 4 p.m., the answering machine light was blinking, a message from Ellis Investigations. Taking a deep breath, I called Oliver Ellis's direct line. This is Oliver Ellis. How can I help you? Hello, it's Ethan Brooks. I was checking in to see if the cameras were installed and if there's been any update, I replied, my pulse quickening. Yes, Mr. Brooks. We installed cameras in both rooms yesterday afternoon and reviewed the footage this morning. Since both rooms were empty, setup was smooth. I hesitated, bracing myself. Did you find anything significant? There was a pause, and then Oliver's voice came through clearly. Yes, Mr. Brooks, your suspicions were correct. They spent the night together in your wife's room, and there were multiple instances of intimacy. I've transferred the footage to DVD, and as you requested, I can email you 3 still frames as evidence. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. Although I had read the details in Sophie's diaries, seeing visual proof made it feel final, inescapably real. Yes, please send the photos. Thank you, Mr. Ellis. If we're squared away financially, I'd like to consider our business concluded. Your payment covers everything. Are you holding up all right? You sound a bit shaken. This can be overwhelming, and it's not unusual to feel a lot of intense emotions, Oliver noted. I'm fine. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Ellis, I replied, keeping my voice as steady as possible. If you plan to consult an attorney, they might require the DVD if you're filing on grounds of infidelity. We retain footage for a year unless instructed otherwise. Many clients find that therapy is helpful during situations like this. A good therapist can make a world of difference, he added. Thank you, Mr. Ellis. I have a plan to cope with this. I appreciate your professionalism, I said, ending the call before he could add anything further. With a numb feeling, I sat at the kitchen table until I heard the email notification ping. Quietly, I walked to the computer and opened the message from Ellis Investigations. Each of the 3 photos was attached, and I printed them on 8 by 10 photo paper. Holding the photos in my hands made the affair a painful reality. The one of them lying together under a sheet affected me the most, driving home the undeniable betrayal. After one last look, I placed the photos in a brown envelope on the kitchen table. Returning to my chair, I resumed reading the 5th diary. By midnight, I had finished the last 2 volumes. Reflecting on everything I'd read, I realized how many details of our relationship Sophie had hidden from me, though they aligned with who I knew her to be. While there weren't many surprises, the diaries revealed deeper insights into her struggles and insecurities, especially regarding her career and our marriage. The biggest shock was learning that our first meeting at a friend's birthday party hadn't been accidental. Sophie had planned it, wanting to reconnect. By the time I closed the final diary, I felt as though I'd seen the entire timeline of our relationship from a new angle. I hadn't noticed how late it had gotten, nor that Sophie still hadn't called. Hungry, I made myself a sandwich and a drink, but the thought of her and Diego haunted me, along with the finality of my decision to end the marriage. My mind spun with all I'd read and witnessed, leaving me restless as I stared into the dark, knowing I would never see my life the same way again. Whether it was the leftover sandwich or the swirling thoughts of Sophie and Diego, I couldn't find any rest. By 7 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep and rose to start the day I had meticulously planned. With a long list of tasks ahead, I needed an early start. Around 8:30 a.m., I decided to call my closest relative, my brother Daniel. We weren't estranged exactly, but we only really saw each other at family holidays. Just 2 weeks ago, Daniel, his wife Evelyn, and their kids, Hank and Luna, had come by for a holiday visit. Daniel was a little surprised by my unexpected call, but they were home and free for the morning. I spent the next couple of hours with them, stopping by their place just after 10. The kids quickly ran off to their own activities, and Evelyn made fresh coffee as Daniel and I sat down to chat. We reflected on our recent Christmas together, and I remembered Daniel mentioning that they had a family trip to Disneyland planned for spring break. Wanting to do something kind, I handed each of his kids a crisp $100 bill. Their smiles and hugs brought a little light to my morning. "You didn't have to do that, Ethan," Daniel said, eyeing me with some concern. "But it was a really nice gesture. The kids are thrilled." I forced a faint smile. "No, I didn't win the lottery. I just wanted to do something nice." We sat there, sipping coffee and making small talk. Evelyn joined us, and at one point, she mentioned, "I can't help bringing up that Sophie told us you two were thinking of starting a family. You'd make great parents." My stomach twisted. "She told you that, huh? Women don't seem to keep much back," I replied, sadness pressing into my tone. Before Evelyn could say more, I changed the subject. "So, Daniel, how's the restaurant?" After we finished our coffee, I stood up to leave. "Just in case I don't see you until next Christmas. Take care of yourselves." I shook Daniel's hand and gave Evelyn a quick hug. "I'll keep you in my thoughts," I said, walking to my car, wondering what they might make of my visit. As I drove off, Daniel turned to Evelyn. "I wonder what's going on with him. He seemed distracted." Evelyn shrugged. "He's probably just waiting for Sophie to come back from her seminar. She said she'd be back tonight." They walked back into the house, discussing their plans for the rest of the day. Just before 6 o'clock that evening, Sophie arrived home. Not seeing me there, she felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. She'd mentally rehearsed our reunion, but my absence threw her off balance. Taking advantage of the quiet, she began unpacking and doing some laundry. As she passed through the kitchen, she spotted a note pinned under the salt shaker. It was from me, saying I'd had to leave for an unexpected work call. Though disappointed, she accepted it, moving on with her evening plans. She headed upstairs, opting for a relaxing bath over a quick shower. While gathering the laundry, she noticed her journal on the dresser. She'd left it in her emergency bag, and seeing it untouched brought her a sense of relief. Originally, she'd meant to update it during the trip but had forgotten until the sight of it jogged her memory. She decided to write while her clothes were in the wash. With the laundry going, she made herself a quick meal and tried calling me, only to find my phone resting in the wicker basket. She sighed, knowing I wouldn't pick up. Returning to the kitchen table, she unlocked her diary with the small key she kept in her wallet and began to write. January 7th. The past 4 days were some of the most intense I've ever lived through, and I need to get everything down, even the unpleasant parts. When I picked up Diego, he seemed thrilled. During the drive, he made advances that irritated me, but he stopped after I warned him to knock it off. Once we left the city behind, I started to relax. We stopped at the mall, and he joined me at Victoria's Secret, even suggesting a few items I ended up buying. I wore one set for him on Wednesday night but threw it away before leaving this morning. I've decided to toss the other sets, too. I don't want reminders of our time at the Sharon. The memories are enough to deal with. Wednesday night he came to my room, and things moved fast. Lying there afterward, I realized the vast difference between physical attraction and true love. I broke things off with Diego, but he didn't take it well. Though I tried to avoid confrontation, he became frustrated. We agreed to sleep on it, but I was already forming my plan to make amends with Ethan. By Friday morning, Diego wasn't accepting my decision to end things, and he pushed again. I locked the door connecting our rooms, and later that night, I saw him with another woman. It was a painful but necessary lesson. Seeing him for what he was helped me regain control. Saturday's drive home with Diego was surprisingly easy. His behavior had changed, and he respected my decision. That drive gave me the resolve to seek therapy to understand what led me to this point. I'm determined not to betray Ethan again and to make things right, even if he never knows the truth. I'm also committed to the idea of starting a family with him. I'll stop taking birth control and let whatever happens happen. Once she'd poured out her thoughts, Sophie placed her pen in the book as a placeholder and set it on the table. She headed upstairs, grabbing the cordless phone in case I called, and prepared a bath. She added bath oils, lit a few candles, and slipped into the warm water, hoping it would help her relax. But as she closed her eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Glancing around the bathroom, she saw nothing out of place. She forced herself to sink back, trying to let the tension slip away, but her mind kept circling back to how she could repair things with me. After an hour, she climbed out, feeling a little better but still unsettled. She dried off and prepared for bed, her thoughts swirling with guilt and determination. From where I waited, I watched her return to the kitchen to move the laundry to the dryer. She sat down at the table to review her journal entry but noticed the pen wasn't in its place. She distinctly remembered leaving it in the book, but now it lay near the wicker basket. She retrieved it, opening her diary to reread the words she had written. The next morning, Sophie woke up feeling refreshed, determined to start anew. She spent her morning cleaning, took a long shower, and dressed in an outfit she knew I liked. By mid-afternoon, she was relaxing at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, enjoying the smell of a roast cooking in the oven. Her quiet afternoon was suddenly interrupted by a knock at the side door. When she looked up, she saw 2 large men standing outside. One in a police uniform, the other in a suit, holding a badge and police ID. Her initial surprise turned quickly into worry. "I'm Detective Harper, and this is Officer Evans with the Springfield Police Department. We're looking for Ethan Brooks. Is he here?" Detective Harper asked. Sophie, attempting to mask her unease, replied, "Ethan's at work right now. When I saw you, I got worried. What's this about?" "I'm his wife, Sophie. Maybe I can help." Detective Harper exchanged a glance with Officer Evans. "It's a bit cold out here. May we come in?" "Of course, come on in," Sophie replied, stepping aside to lead them into the kitchen. "Why are you looking for Ethan? He's not hurt, is he?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of worry. "No, ma'am, nothing like that. As far as we know, your husband is safe. We just need to speak with him regarding a case we're investigating." "Are you certain he's at work?" Detective Harper asked, studying her reaction. Yes, he is, Sophie replied, moving to the counter and retrieving the note I had left for her. Handing it over, she explained. You can read the message he left. He wrote it for me when I returned from my trip last night. Officer Evans positioned himself near the back entrance, glancing around as if assessing the space. Detective Harper scanned the note, then looked at Sophie. Do you mind if I hold on to this, Mrs. Brooks? No, I'm afraid I need it back, she replied firmly, reclaiming the note. Detective Harper handed it back, then continued. We received a homicide report this morning, and the call was traced to your husband's cell phone. We're working with the carrier to determine his location at the time. Sophie's face showed a moment of relief. There has to be a mistake. I tried calling Ethan when I got home last night, but his phone was here, she said, pointing to a wicker basket on the kitchen table. Detective Harper walked over and examined the basket but saw no phone. I don't see it here, Mrs. Brooks. Are you certain about when you saw it? Sophie's expression fell, her voice turning anxious. I don't understand. It was definitely here last night, she insisted, her voice rising with worry. Well, Mrs. Brooks, the call we traced to your husband's phone was indeed made from his device, Detective Harper said, jotting down a note. He paused, then asked, Is your husband familiar with a man named Diego Vargas? The color drained from Sophie's face at the mention of Diego. I know Diego Vargas, but my husband doesn't. He was my teaching assistant last semester, she said, trying to keep her tone steady. So, your husband had no reason to dislike Mr. Vargas? You're certain he didn't know him? Detective Harper pressed. No, Ethan never met Diego, she replied, though the tension in her voice betrayed her. Detective Harper made another note, then met her gaze. It appears, Mrs. Brooks, that your husband was acquainted enough with Mr. Vargas to report his death. Sophie's legs gave way, and she sank into a chair. Diego is dead? But I brought him home with me yesterday around 5:30. How can he be dead? The detective took a seat across from her, looking at her intently. What was your relationship with Mr. Vargas, Mrs. Brooks? Is there any chance your husband might have had a motive to harm him? Sophie's face turned even paler as she struggled to answer. Diego was just a student. There was no reason for either of them to hurt each other, she said, but her voice sounded uncertain. Detective Harper let her words hang in the air before he continued. When we arrived at the address linked to your husband, we found signs of a violent struggle involving Mr. Vargas. A travel bag was left in the hallway, and footprints indicated there had been a fight. Sophie's face crumpled as he went on. It appears Mr. Vargas lost that struggle. Sophie, her voice trembling, interrupted. Ethan would never do something like that. He's not that kind of person. Her tears, once sorrowful, now held an edge of anger. The detective glanced at his notes. According to state records, your husband owns a registered .25 caliber semi-automatic pistol. One of the bullets at the scene matches that caliber, suggesting a link to his weapon. The motive, however, remains unclear. He pulled a set of photocopies from his folder, laying 3 in front of her. These photos were found at the scene. The position of each photo suggests Mr. Vargas was shown them shortly before his death, and blood spatter on the images indicates they were present during the fatal shot. I don't believe you've been entirely forthcoming about your connection with Mr. Vargas or about your husband's awareness of him. Sophie's face contorted as she picked up the photocopies, her shock morphing into horror as she studied each one. Her grip on the photos faltered as she whispered, No, Ethan couldn't have known. Her composure broke, and she sobbed uncontrollably, repeating, He couldn't have known. Detective Harper's cell phone rang, interrupting the tense moment. He answered, speaking little during the 3-minute call while scribbling down notes. Meanwhile, Sophie sat silently, her hands covering her tear-streaked face, shoulders trembling with each suppressed sob. When he hung up, Detective Harper addressed her solemnly. Mrs. Brooks, your husband's call was traced to Windsor, Ontario. Local authorities, working with his cell carrier, pinpointed his device in a bag along with his credit cards and a .25 caliber pistol registered to him. The bag was found in a trash bin at a Walmart parking lot. Neither your husband nor his vehicle was spotted, but license plates matching his were discarded nearby. It appears he may have swapped them to blend in with Ontario traffic. The information only deepened Sophie's despair as she remained seated, crying into her hands. After a few minutes, the detective drew another photocopy from his folder and placed it on the table in front of her. It was a close-up of a small brass key beside a ruler. "We found this key at the scene. Do you recognize it?" Sophie examined the image, then quickly dug into her purse and pulled out her wallet. She found a matching key, comparing it to the one in the photo. Realizing its significance, she collapsed back into the chair, muttering, "Diary, Ethan." The two officers gave her a few minutes to pull herself together, offering their patience. Eventually, they suggested she contact someone for support. After ensuring her sister would come to stay with her, they made their way to the door and stepped outside. As they walked to their cars, Officer Evans turned to Detective Harper. "Do you think they'll catch him soon?" "It depends on how well he can stay hidden," Harper replied. "He hasn't committed any crimes in Canada yet, so they may not prioritize his search. If he avoids detection, his chances of staying free improve with time. If he's still at large in 6 months, we might consider a wider alert, even publicizing his case on most wanted shows." Evans thought about this before asking, "What's your take on her story about the cell phone? She seemed sincere when she said it was there last night." "I agree. I don't think she was lying," Harper said, pausing in thought. "My best guess is he came home but changed his mind. He probably grabbed his phone and left without going through with whatever he initially planned." Evans frowned. "But why would he come back at all? It seems strange for him to risk it just for the phone." Harper stopped and looked at Evans, his expression grave. "Think about it. The only reason he'd come back here, as far as I can tell, would be to confront his wife, and maybe himself. Something must have changed his mind. I doubt he came back just for the phone." Evans nodded slowly, taking in Harper's words. "Mrs. Brooks may eventually realize how close she came to being his next victim. When she does, I wonder how she'll process it, and how she'll feel about still being alive."